Well, good morning, and welcome to the Vatican Museums. This will be, without a doubt, the largest gallery you'll visit on this trip. It will certainly keep you on your feet the longest. Now, you'd think that a gallery that's essentially owned and operated by the Catholic Church would contain primarily Christian art. Well, wrong. The Vatican Museum embodies a vast tapestry of artworks dating from the ancients through the present. Here, you'll have a chance to experience the art of ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, and the Etruscans. Then you'll fast forward to the Renaissance and the frescoes of Raphael, followed by another fast forward through contemporary Christian art, and finally, as the grand finale, Michelangelo's magnificent frescoes in the Sistine Chapel. Well, before we get started, let me give you a little bit of background about this place. After all, how did the Church wind up with all of this pagan art on display anyway? The museum is contained in what used to be part of the papal palaces, built from the 13th century onwards. It was the Renaissance popes from the 15th and 16th century who collected most of what you'll be seeing. After the fall of Rome, the Church took on the responsibility of preserving civilization, collecting artifacts from cultures that were dead or dying. However, to put it less charitably, the magnificent popes of the Renaissance, the very ones that Martin Luther railed against, also loved to surround themselves with things of beauty as a way of displaying their authority. Beauty as an expression of power is something we'll talk about when we get to Florence, so I won't get ahead of myself yet. Okay, let's get started. From time to time, I'll orient you with a room number, which will hopefully keep you from getting lost. The room numbers are posted in Roman numerals, so if you can't remember how Roman numerals work, well, just ask a Roman. Head back into the museum from where you came out into the courtyard, hang a right, head up the stairs, and you should find yourself in the Egyptian rooms. I'll meet you there. Well, here we are, surrounded by ancient Egypt. Most of what we'll see here found its way into the Vatican Museum in the 18th and 19th century, and a lot of it was acquired by the ancient Romans when they conquered Egypt. The reason it's here is because of the importance of Egypt in the salvation story of Scripture. There's a lot to see here, so please feel free to pause your tour at any time and just browse around. One thing to keep in mind: Egyptian art was for religion, not for decoration. A statue or a painting preserved the likeness of someone and therefore gave him a form of eternal life. Most of the art you see was for tombs. This first room is full of hieroglyphics and statues dating all the way back to 2600 BC through 600 BC. Feel free to look around, but don't get stuck here. We have a long way to go. When you're ready, move into the next room and find the mummy in the glass case. What Egyptian museum would be complete without a mummy? This woman died 3,000 years ago. Her corpse was disemboweled and her organs placed in a jar like those you see nearby. Then the body was filled with pitch, dried with natron, which is a natural sodium carbonate, wrapped in linen, and then placed in a wooden coffin. That wood coffin went inside of a stone coffin like the ones you see on the back wall, and then into a tomb. Take a look at her henna-dried hair. In the next life, your spirit still needed a body, and you really wanted to look your best. Painted inside the coffin lid is a list of what the deceased packed for their journey to eternity. You should see an example around the corner of this display case. The coffins were decorated with magical spells to protect the body from evil. Looking around, it's obvious that our friend had not mastered the art of traveling with that 22-inch suitcase. The room is full of funerary artifacts and customs, and it's a good reminder that central to the ancient Egyptians' worldview was their view of death and a belief in an afterlife where you really could take it all with you. Well, whenever you're ready, move on into room 3. You should now be in room 3. The statues in this room aren't real, honest-to-goodness Egyptian originals, but ancient Roman knockoffs to decorate Hadrian's villa. Still, they're pretty good. You might remember that video we saw in which our friend Nigel Spivey talked about the Egyptian way of representing the human body. Egyptian statues walk awkwardly as if they're carrying heavy buckets, with arms straight down at their sides. They're stiff, two-dimensional, and schematic. The art is only realistic enough to get the job done. In Egyptian belief, a statue like this could be a stable refuge for the wandering soul of a dead man. If you remember from the video, representations of the human body were made according to an established set of proportions, a formula that remained unchanged for centuries. Well, when you're ready, move into room 4. Okay, room 4 is the room before the curved hallway, and looking around here, you should be able to find various Egyptian gods depicted as animals. The one I want you to look for is Anubis. Actually, this is Hermanubis. Look for the dog-headed fellow in the toga. Anubis was the Egyptian god of mummification and the afterlife, and was portrayed as half human, half jackal. Once you died, you belonged to Anubis. He would protect you on your journey to the afterlife and determine your fate once there. During the Ptolemaic period, which was after Egypt was conquered by Alexander the Great and Egypt fell under the influence of Hellenism, Anubis was merged with his Greek counterpart Hermes. Now, the god before you actually came a bit later, around the 1st or 2nd century A.D., and is wearing a Roman-style toga. By the way, in his left hand he's carrying the familiar emblem of medicine and healing, the caduceus, which he used to guide souls to the afterlife. Moving right along, Egyptians believed in the superiority of animals and worshipped them as incarnations of the gods. At the moment, you are in a veritable Petco pantheon. Look for the lioness, who portrays the fierce goddess Sekhmet. The clever baboon is Thought, the god of wisdom. And at the end of the curved hall, on your right, is a small white marble statue of Bes, the patron of pregnant women. Make your way down that hallway, and when you get to room 7, stop there. Okay, you should be in room 7, which I believe is the second room after the curved hallway. I just want to point this room out to you as a reminder that 332 BC marked the beginning of the Hellenic period, or the Ptolemaic period, in ancient Egypt. This was the year that Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, and for 3 centuries, the previously frozen-in-time Egyptian culture was transformed by the Greeks. The Ptolemaic period ended in 30 BC, when Mark Antony and Cleopatra died and Egypt was conquered by the Romans. But during that glorious period, the city of Alexandria was the capital of Hellenic Egypt and produced many of the artifacts that you see in this room, many of them made of terracotta and bronze. You will also see some later artifacts from Christian and later from Islamic Egypt. When you're ready, move ahead into room 8. In room 8, take a quick look into the glass case which contains some brown clay tablets. You may remember from some time in your distant past that it wasn't the Greeks or even the Egyptians who invented writing. It was the Sumerians in Mesopotamia, the ancestors of the ancient Babylonians and the modern Iraqis, who invented it around 3000 BC. People wrote on clay tablets by pressing into the wet clay with a wedge-shaped pen, creating cuneiforms. The Sumerians also rolled cylinder seals into soft clay to make an impression used to seal documents and mark property. With that, we leave ancient Egypt and head into ancient Greece and Rome. Take your time and I'll meet up with you in the octagonal courtyard. But first, a little detour. As you leave the room, instead of following the crowds to the left, go to your right. You'll find a long corridor lined with statues and busts of Roman-era Caesars and gods, and sometimes both. Go all the way down and you'll find a doorway to your right, which will take you into the Braccia Nuova, or the New Wing. A little ways down on your right, you'll find that famous statue of Caesar Augustus, known as the Augustus of Prima Porta. You'll probably recognize it from having seen it in class. Caesar Augustus, right arm outstretched, clad in armor, but no helmet or shoes. And when you're ready, come back the way you came, past the Egyptian room, and hang a left into the octagonal courtyard. I'll see you there. Well, you should now be in the octagonal courtyard. Whether you've ever thought about it or not, our lives would be quite different if not for a relative handful of Greeks in a small city about 450 years before Christ. Athens set the tone for the rest of the West. Democracy, theater, economics, literature, and art all flourished in Athens during a 50-year golden age. Greek culture was then appropriated by Rome and then, some 1,500 years later, revived during the Renaissance. It was those Renaissance popes who built and decorated these papal palaces, recreating the glory of the classical world. Okay, before we get started, a quick review. Remember, there were essentially three periods we need to concern ourselves with in Greek art. And they were... What? Okay, what were they? All right, the Archaic period, from 800 to 500 BC, and that was the stuff that comes across as kind of crude and stiff, actually not too far removed from our Egyptian friends a while back. And then, what? Think. Right, the Golden Age, that 50-year period from about 450 to 400 BC. And what did that stuff look like? Okay, it included poses that looked natural and relaxed, and uses the classic Greek contrapposto. Golden Age sculpture was all about balance and symmetry, very much the presentation of the idealized form. And then finally, right, the Hellenistic period. Rather than those noble, idealized gods, Hellenistic sculpture was about real people with real emotions. Some are candid snapshots of everyday life, like a boy pulling a thorn out of his foot, and others depict people in extreme moments, struggling to overcome life's obstacles. So what I'd like you to do is take a minute just to circle the courtyard and mentally categorize what you see. There aren't any examples of archaic sculpture here, but there are both Golden Age and Hellenistic examples. So just look quickly, decide which is which, and end up at the sculpture that is to the left of the entryway into the courtyard, the Apollo Belvedere. You should be in front of Apollo, the extremely good-looking, which is literally what the name Belvedere means. All right, is this Golden Age or Hellenistic? If you said Golden Age, you'd be correct. Apollo is the god of sun and of music, and here he's depicted as a hunter. Running through the forest, he spots his prey. Keeping his eye on the animal, he slows down and prepares to put an arrow into his bow. Well, use your imagination. The Greek sculptor Leochares, following the style of the greater Greek sculptor Praxiteles, fully captured the beauty of the human form. The anatomy is perfect. The pose is completely natural and contrapposto. The classical Greeks loved balance. A well-rounded man was both a thinker and an athlete, a poet and a warrior, a trombonist and a tour guide. Well, maybe not. In art, Apollo Belvedere balances several opposites. He's moving, but not out of control. Apollo eyes his target, but he hasn't attacked yet. He's realistic, but with idealized godlike features. And the smoothness of his muscles is balanced by the rough folds of his cloak. During the Renaissance, when this Roman copy of the original Greek work was discovered, it was considered the most perfect work of art in the world. The handsome face, eternal youth, and body that seems to float just above the pedestal makes Apollo Belvedere seem superhuman, divine, and godlike, even for devout Christians. When you're done admiring or maybe swooning, move to the second wall of the octagon on your right. You'll probably see a bunch of tourists clustered around there. When you arrive at the Laocoon, I'll fill you in. Okay, quick. Golden Age or Hellenistic? Right, Hellenistic. Laocoon, the high priest of Troy, warned his fellow Trojans, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." If you remember the story, the attacking Greeks had brought the Trojan horse to the gates as a ploy to get inside the city walls, and Laocoon tried to warn his people not to bring it inside. But the gods wanted the Greeks to win, so they sent huge snakes to crush him and his 2 sons to death. We see them at the height of their terror, when they realize that no matter how hard they try to struggle, they and the rest of Troy are doomed. The figures were carved from 4 separate blocks of marble, then pieced together seamlessly. They're powerful, not light or graceful. The poses are as twisted as possible, accentuating every rippling muscle and bulging vein. Follow the line of motion from Laocoon's left foot, up his leg, through his body, and out his right arm. Goethe would stand where you're standing, blink his eyes rapidly, and watch the statue flicker to life. Go ahead, try it. Laocoon was sculpted some 4 centuries after the Golden Age, after the scales of balance had been tipped. Whereas Apollo is a balance between stillness and motion, this is unbridled dynamism. Apollo is serene, graceful, and godlike, while Laocoon is powerful, emotional, and gritty. Laocoon, which was the most famous Greek statue in ancient Rome and considered superior to all other sculpture or painting, was lost for more than 1,000 years. Then, in 1506, it was rediscovered in the ruins of Nero's Golden House near the Colosseum. The discovery caused a sensation, especially on a young sculptor from Florence who was now residing in Rome. His name was Michelangelo, and the Laocoon was a revelation to him. 2 years later, he'd be painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and the dynamic vocabulary of Laocoon would add a new level of emotional power to his figures. All right, when you're ready to leave the sculpture garden, make your way out to the right of the Laocoon, pass through the Hall of Animals, and I'll meet you at the limbless torso in the middle of the next large hall, the Belvedere torso. Over the last few days and over the next several, you're going to see a lot of sculpture. In fact, it might be easy to forget what truly incredible art sculpture is. This isn't the stuff we did with lumps of clay in grade school. Marble sculpture involved the sheer physical labor of digging the rock out of the earth, or quarrying it, dressing it, and then chipping the figure out of solid stone. And yet it requires the highest degree of artistry and delicacy. If you can imagine a 300-pound linebacker dancing ballet, I think you'll get the idea of what sculpture requires. This is the Belvedere torso, or like Apollo, the really good-looking abs and thighs. This is all that remains of an ancient statue of Hercules seated on a lion's skin. This was also a significant source of inspiration for Michelangelo. He could spend days admiring this sculpture. He would caress it and say, "I am the pupil of the torso." To him, it contained all the beauty of classical sculpture. And yet, it's not beautiful at all. Compared to Apollo, it's downright ugly. Michelangelo was not all that good-looking himself, but he was looking for a new kind of beauty, not of the idealized gods of the Golden Age Greeks, but the innate beauty of every person, even the so-called ugly ones. With its knotty lumps of muscle, the torso has a brute power and a distinctive personality in spite of, or maybe because of, its rough edges. Remember the torso, because we'll see it again later on. Take a moment to admire this incredible work of antiquity, and then head into the next domed room. You should now be in the big domed hall. This room is modeled on the interior of the Pantheon, and so it gives you some idea of Roman grandeur. Remember, size matters. Romans took Greek ideas and made them bigger, like that big bronze statue to your right of Hercules with his club. This statue was found near the Theatre of Pompey by the modern-day Campo de' Fiori, which was, incidentally, the site of the assassination of Julius Caesar. The mosaic floor you see in front of you once decorated the bottom of a pool in an ancient Roman bath. The enormous Roman basin/hot tub/bird bath decorated Nero's palace. It was made of a single block of purple porphyry stone imported from the desert of Egypt. Purple was a rare, royal, expensive, and prestigious color in its day. This was the stone of emperors, and then of popes. Unfortunately, now it's all been quarried out, and the only porphyry available to anyone has to be recycled. Now head into the next room and look at the sarcophagi. The large porphyry marble coffin on the left was made for the Roman Emperor Constantine's mother, Helen. The one on the right was for his daughter, Costanza. They were never used, so don't worry. They're not occupied. Take a look at Helena's coffin on the left. You'll see depicted a battle game showing dying victims in their barbarian attire. Costanza's is decorated with a mix of Christian and pagan themes. Now think back a couple of days to our visit to the Roman Forum and the Colosseum. Do you remember the Arch of Constantine and what we learned about him? He was the Roman emperor who legalized Christianity in AD 312. Constantine's mother and daughter were Christians, and before 312 they were therefore outlaws. Both of these sarcophagi were quarried and worked on in Egypt. Porphyry, as I said, is extremely rare and is made of very hard marble and required especially tempered metal tools. The technique for working on this kind of stone was lost soon after these sarcophagi were made and not developed again until Renaissance times in Florence. Now, I'm going to take you on a little detour. While most of the crowds are making a beeline to the Sistine Chapel, we're going to escape them for a few minutes and see some of what I think are the coolest pieces of art in the museum. At least they are the oldest. Look for the signs to the Etruscan Museum, or Museo Etrusco, and follow them. You'll need to go up to the second floor. You should now be in the Etruscan Museum. I'm going to say a few things and then let you go on ahead and look at this section of the museum at your leisure. Although we don't know a lot about the Etruscans, we do know that their civilization thrived here from about 800 to 500 BC, just before the rise of Rome. To jog your memory, here's what our friend Rick Steves has to say about the Etruscans. Just before the rise of Rome, the Etruscan people of central Italy, now the area between Rome and Florence, had their own golden age of peace and prosperity. Their mix of Greek-style art and Roman-style customs helped lay the foundation of civilization for the flourishing of Rome. More technologically advanced than their neighbors, the Etruscans mined gold and crafted it into some of the finest jewelry in the known world. The Etruscans exported this fine jewelry around the Mediterranean while importing Greek pottery and customs. Judging from many of the luxury items which you'll see in this collection, the Etruscans enjoyed the good life. Frescoes show vibrant, well-dressed men and women dining, dancing in the gardens, or playing party games. Etruscan artists celebrated individual people, showing their wrinkles, crooked noses, silly smiles, and quirky haircuts. The thousands upon thousands of surviving ceramic plates, cups, and vases tell us that hosting a banquet for your friends was a symbol that you'd arrived. Men and women ate together, propped on elbows or dining couches, surrounded by colorful frescoes and terracotta tiles. Their plates and cups were either imported from Greece or made in the Greek style, painted red and black and decorated with nymphs, soldiers, sphinxes, and gods. Flute players entertained the guests, who were waited on by elegant and well-treated slaves. Much of what we do know about the Etruscans comes from their tombs, often clustered in a necropolis or city of the dead. The tomb was your home in the hereafter, fully furnished for the afterlife, complete with all of the deceased's belongings. The sarcophagus might have a statue on the lid showing the dearly departed at a banquet as he reclines on a dining couch with his wife. Smiles are on their faces as they live the good life for all eternity. The Etruscans were eventually conquered and assimilated by the Romans, but their culture lived on in Rome's religion, with its pantheon of gods and rituals of divination, its realistic art, its banqueting lifestyle, and its taste for all things Greek. So wander through this little traveled section of the museum and admire the artistry on display in the sarcophagi, the funeral urns, chariots, jewelry, pottery, and the other remnants of this ancient people. When you're done, I'll meet you back in the long gallery of sculptures. Okay, here we go. Get ready for a quarter-mile march to the Renaissance. Actually, this long walk may give you a sense of the scale that Renaissance popes built on. Remember, this building was originally a series of papal palaces. The popes loved beautiful things: statues, urns, marble floors, friezes, stuccoed ceilings, and as heirs of imperial Rome, they felt they deserved such luxury. The palaces and art represent both the peak and the decline of the Catholic Church in Europe. It was extravagant spending like this that inspired Martin Luther to rebel, starting the Protestant Reformation. Head down this long corridor into the second chamber and look for the statue of Diana, the Huntress. Okay, you should find Diana on your left. It's a statue of the Virgin Goddess as she's going hunting. Roman hunters would pray and give offerings to statues like this to get divine help in their search for food. Now look on the opposite wall, on your right, and look for the statue of another version of this goddess, now Artemis, with a crown and her arms outstretched. It was farmers who might pray to this billion-breasted beauty, who stood for fertility. Or are those really extra breasts? Some historians say that bulls were sacrificed to Artemis and castrated, and their testicles were draped over the statues as symbols of fertility. Well, moving right along. Ahead, you will find the section of the corridor that's hung with tapestries. When you get there, I'll meet you there. Okay, you should be in the Hall of the Tapestries. Take a look at the exquisite workmanship of these tapestries. Along the left wall are tapestries that were designed by Raphael's workshop and made in Brussels. They show scenes from the life of Christ, baby Jesus in the manger, being adored by the shepherds, the presentation in the temple. The resurrection tapestry with Jesus coming out of the tomb is curiously interactive. As you walk, Jesus' eyes, feet, knees, even the stone square follow you across the room. Also, take a look at the beautiful sculpted reliefs on the ceiling. Admire the workmanship of this relief. But wait, it's not a relief at all. It's painted on a flat surface. Illusions like this were proof that painters had mastered the 3D realism of ancient statues. Okay, let's move ahead to the next area, which is the map gallery. Okay, you should be in the map gallery now. This gallery still feels like a pope's palace. The crusted ceiling of colorful stucco and paint is pure papal splendor. The 16th century maps on the walls show the regions of Italy, which is why you won't find Spokane on any of these maps, or Usk for that matter. Popes could take visitors on a virtual tour of Italy, from the toe at the entrance of the end of the gallery to the Alps at the far end, with East Italy on the right wall, West on the left. The scenes on the ceiling portray exciting moments in church history in each of those regions. So, why just Italy? After all, the church could be found in lots of other places. Well, remember that in the 16th century, the Pope was the dominant political power on the Italian peninsula. Okay, if you need to take a little break and can find somewhere to sit and rest your feet, this isn't a bad time to do it. The next stop will be the Raphael rooms. So when you're ready to go, follow the signs and I'll meet you in the first big room called the Sala Sobieski, with a huge painting of Sobieski liberating Vienna from the Ottomans. Congratulations, you made it down the long corridor, and you should now be in the Sala Sobieski. We are now done with the art of the ancients, and we now fast forward about 1,000 years to the Renaissance. But first, we're fast forwarding again to the 19th century. We're entering the living quarters of the great Renaissance popes. These are the rooms where they slept, worked, and worshipped. The rooms reflect the grandeur of their position. They hired the best artists, mostly from Florence, to paint the walls and ceilings, combining classical and Christian motifs. Now, the giant painting in this room comes from a little bit later, comes from the 19th century. It depicts Sobieski liberating Vienna from the Ottomans in 1683, which finally tipped the tide in favor of a Christian Europe. Don't forget, before that, large chunks of Eastern Europe and the Iberian Peninsula had been held by Muslims for centuries. On the left of the painting, you'll see the Muslim tents, and on the right, the spires of Christian Vienna. This painting was done in the 19th century by Jan Matejko. Now, looking clockwise, you'll also find a large painting by Cesare Fracassini called The Martyrs of Gornichem. Completed in 1867, this painting depicts the 1572 martyrdom of 19 Dutch Catholic friars and clerics by Calvinists in the town of Gornichem. After their arrest, the men refused to recant their beliefs in the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist and in papal supremacy, and so they were hanged. The martyrs were beatified in 1675 and canonized as saints in 1865, 2 years before this was painted. Now, one thing you will notice is that there's a stronger sense of realism about this painting. And also pay attention to perspective. In a sense, you, the viewer, are now in the painting because you are looking at this scene from a specific position and a specific angle. Looking to its right, you'll see another mildly gruesome painting called St. Grata Recognizes the Remains of St. Alexander, which was completed in 1887 by Ponziano Lavarini. According to church tradition, Alexander of Bergamo was a Roman centurion who was beheaded in 303 for not renouncing his Christian faith. His body was found by a noblewoman, St. Greta, as flowers grew from the martyr's blood. Go ahead and move to the next room. In this room, you should see some frescoes that also date from the 19th century and illustrate the dogma of the Immaculate Conception pronounced by Pius IX in 1854. In case you're not familiar with this, the Immaculate Conception holds that Mary, the Mother of Christ, was kept free of original sin from the moment of her conception by her parents. Okay. After you've looked around here, go ahead and exit this room. You'll pass along an outside walkway, and you'll end up in the first of the Raphael rooms, which is known as the Constantine room. Okay, before I get started with this room, see if you can find a place to sit down. There may be a bench right in the middle of the room, and if there's a space on it, see if you can sit down there, or someplace near the middle, where you can have a chance to just look around the whole room and also up at the ceiling. This is an impressive room, don't you think? There's a lot to take in. First, let me explain a bit about the art of the fresco. A fresco is simply a painting on plaster. There are two types. The first, fresco secco, or dry fresco, is painting on dry plaster with glue-based paints. The other, buon fresco, is more difficult because that involves painting on wet plaster with water-based paints. This is what you're looking at. To do a buon fresco, first of all, the artists would make a full-size sketch of the picture on a large piece of paper, which was called a cartoon. Then the artist and his assistants would mix lime and water to make plaster, and then they would trowel it onto the wall, but only as much as the artist could paint while it's still wet. This is why fresco painters never worked alone. They needed a team of skilled assistants to make the plaster and to apply it. The artist then placed the cartoon against the wall and traced the outline of the sketch into the plaster. Usually they did this by piercing the cartoon repeatedly along the lines and dusting the cartoon with colored powder. After the cartoon was removed, the dots marked the outline on the wall, and all the artist had to do was connect the dots and fill in the color. The artist had to work fast while the plaster was still wet. So any large fresco, such as the ones you see here, consists of many small, seamless chunks of work done in a single day. The work was speedy, but as you can see, the results last a long time. The lime of the plaster binds with both the paint and the wall, creating an integral whole that lasts centuries. These bold frescoes were best suited for large rooms that called for epic works of art. Indeed, they are part interior decoration and part artistic expression. And they were best suited for the vast spaces found in Renaissance papal palaces and churches. So, who was Raphael, and why does he warrant one-named fame like Michelangelo, Leonardo, Midori, and Madonna? Well, Raphael was one seriously talented painter. He was just 25 when Pope Julius II invited him to paint the walls of his personal living quarters. Julius was so impressed by Raphael's talent that he had the work of previous masters scraped off the walls to give the young upstart free rein to paint whatever he wanted. Raphael lived a charmed life. He was handsome and sophisticated, and soon became the Pope's favorite. He painted masterpieces effortlessly. In a different decade, he might have been thrown out of the church as an unrepented sinner, but his love affairs and devil-may-care attitude seem to epitomize the optimistic pagan spirit of the Renaissance. His works are graceful, but never lightweight or frilly. They're strong, balanced, and harmonious in the best Renaissance tradition. When he died in 1520, the High Renaissance died with him. Now, take a look at the big frescoes in front of you. They celebrate the passing of the baton from one culture to the next. Rome was a pagan empire persecuting a new cult from the East, Christianity. Look at the fresco on your left. On the night of October 27th, A.D. 312, as General Constantine, dressed in gold with a crown, was preparing his troops for a coup d'etat, he looked up and saw something strange. A cross appeared in the sky with the words, "By this sign you will conquer." Now look at the long wall in front opposite the entrance. The next day, Constantine's troops raged victoriously into battle with a Christian cross atop their Roman eagle banners. Constantine is at the center with a smile on his face, slashing through the enemy, while God's warrior angels ride shotgun overhead. Now, the right wall. Constantine stripped and knelt before the Pope to be baptized, or so some say. As emperor, Constantine legalized Christianity and worked hand in hand with the Pope, as you can see on the wall with the windows. When Rome eventually fell, its glory lived on through the Dark Ages in the pomp, pageantry, and learning of the Catholic Church. Now, look up to the ceiling. This is actually one of my favorite frescoes. A classical statue is knocked backwards and into pieces before the overpowering force of the cross. The message? Christianity triumphs over pagan Rome. But wait, there may be another message here. You probably can't see this with the naked eye from this distance, but if you have a camera with a zoom lens, take a closer look at the headpiece of the classical statue. Can you tell which god it is? Well, it's the god Mercury, who was the messenger of the gods in Roman mythology. Mercury, the intermediary between gods and mortals. As Paul wrote in his first letter to Timothy, "For there is one God, there is also one mediator between God and humankind, Jesus Christ, himself human, who gave himself a ransom for all. This was attested at the right time." And as the writer of the letter to the Hebrews said, "Therefore, my friends, since we have confidence to enter the sanctuary by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us approach with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water." The message is clear. Jesus trumps Mercury. But here's something to think about. Was Raphael a closet Lutheran? Wasn't this a key issue that Martin Luther up north in Germany was railing about just as Raphael was painting these frescoes? Luther felt that the Pope had placed himself between God and the believer and was usurping Christ's role as the only mediator. I don't know, but maybe it's a good thing old Julius couldn't make out the broken God on the ceiling from way down below. Okay, I've talked enough for a bit. Stroll around, enjoy these frescoes, and when you're ready, continue through the next room and bookshop, and then into the room where you'll see a fresco of the liberation of St. Peter. Okay, if you're in the right room, you should be looking at a fresco over the window, probably to the right of where you entered. And you may remember this story from the 12th chapter of Acts. About this time, King Herod laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church. He had James, the brother of John, killed with the sword. After he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the festival of unleavened bread. When he had seized him, he put him in prison and handed him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending to bring him out to the people after the Passover. While Peter was kept in prison, the church prayed fervently to God for him. But then, in the middle of the night, an angel appeared and rescued Peter from the sleeping guards. The chains miraculously fell away, and eventually ended up in St. Peter and Chains Church a few blocks from our hotel. And the angel led him to safety, as you can see on the right, while the guards caught hell from their captain on the left. This little drama is divided into 3 separate acts that make a balanced visual composition. Raphael makes the miraculous event even more dramatic with the use of 4 kinds of light illuminating the dark cell: the half-moon light, the captain's torch, the radiant angel, and the natural light spilling in through the museum's window. Raphael's mastery of realism, rich colors, and sense of drama made him understandably famous. You will also find Pope Julius II in the role of Peter in the Liberation, and as the bearded and kneeling Pope in the Mass of Bolsena on the opposite wall, directly behind you if you're still facing Peter. This fresco commemorates the miracle, which is celebrated today as the Feast of Corpus Christi. In 1263, a priest who doubted the doctrine of the real presence was celebrating Mass in Bolsena. At the moment of consecration, he saw blood on the host. The overall theme of this room is the divine protection of the Church. In case you're wondering about the other 2 frescoes, if you are back facing Peter, the fresco on the wall to your right is the expulsion of Heliodorus from the temple, a story taken from the book of Maccabees in the Apocrypha. Here, Heliodorus, who's trying to steal the temple treasure, is expelled by the angels. Pope Julius can also be seen here on the left in his papal chair. The other fresco to the left of Peter is of St. Leo the Great repulsing Attila the Hun. Here, Pope Leo I meets the Huns and stops their advance, aided by St. Peter and St. Paul. But there's no Pope Julius in this one. Julius II died in 1513 before the fresco was finished, so Raphael substituted the new pope, Leo X. Let's move on to the next room. This is the signature room, which was used as a library, a study, and the room for signing papal bulls, such as the one that excommunicated that troublesome monk from up north, Martin Luther. The theme of this room illustrates the three great principles of the human spirit: truth, goodness, and beauty. Easily the most famous fresco in this room is the one on the wall of the entrance. I knew it because it was on the cover of my college philosophy textbook. It's Raphael's School of Athens. In both style and substance, this fresco sums up the spirit of the Renaissance, which was not only the rebirth of classical art, but rebirth of learning, discovery, and the optimistic spirit that man is a rational creature. Raphael pays respect to the great thinkers and scientists of ancient Greece, gathering them together at one time in a mythical school setting. In the center are Plato and Aristotle, the two greatest Greeks. Plato points up, indicating his philosophy that mathematics and pure ideas are the source of truth, while Aristotle points down, showing his preference for hands-on study of the material world. There's their masters. Socrates, midway to the left, in green, ticking off arguments on his fingers. And in the foreground at right, the bald Euclid bends over a slate to demonstrate a geometrical formula. Raphael shows that Renaissance thinkers were as good as the ancients. There's Leonardo da Vinci, whom Raphael worshipped in the role of Plato. Euclid is the architect Donato Bramante, who designed St. Peter's. Raphael himself, next to last on the far right, with the black beret, looks out at us. And the school building is actually an early version of St. Peter's Basilica, which was under construction as this was being painted. Raphael balances everything symmetrically, thinkers on the left, scientists on the right, with Plato and Aristotle dead center, showing the geometrical order found in the world. Look at the square floor tiles in the foreground. If you laid a ruler over them and extended the line upward, it would run right to the center of the picture. Similarly, the tops of the columns all slope down to the middle. All the lines of sight draw our attention to Plato and Aristotle, and to the small arch over their heads, a halo over these two secular saints in divine pursuit of knowledge. While Raphael was painting this room, Michelangelo was at work down the hall in the Sistine Chapel. Raphael had just finished the School of Athens when he got a look at Michelangelo's powerful figures and dramatic scenes. He was astonished. From this point on, Raphael began to beef up his delicate, graceful style to a more heroic level. He returned to the School of Athens and added one more figure to the scene: Michelangelo, the brooding, melancholy figure in front, leaning on a block of marble. Now, turn around and look at the other big fresco in this room. As if to underscore the new attitude that pre-Christian philosophy and church thinking could coexist, Raphael painted the Disputa, facing the School of Athens. Christ and the saints in heaven are overseeing a discussion of the Eucharist, or, in Protestant terms, communion, by mortals below. The classical-looking character in blue and gold looks out as if to say, the pagans had their School of Athens, but we Christians, pointing up, have the School of Heaven. According to the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation, the communion wafer miraculously becomes the literal body of Christ when it's consecrated by a priest, bringing a little bit of heaven into the material world. Raphael's painting also connects heaven and earth with descending circles, Jesus in a halo, down to the dove of the Holy Spirit in a halo, which enters the communion wafer in its holder. Balance and symmetry reign, form the angel trios in the upper corners to the books littering the floor. Find Dante wearing his Poets Laureate in the right corner. If you don't recognize him, take a look at a €2 coin. That's him there too, modeled on this detail of the Disputa. I mentioned that the theme of this room was truth, goodness, and beauty. The fresco on the left of the Disputa picks up on the theme of goodness. It is the cardinal and theological virtues, showing above the windows strength, prudence, and temperance, and faith, hope, and charity as cupids. On the right, Pope Gregory IX, looking an awful lot like Julius II, accepts the canon law, and on the left, Justinian approves the Pandects comprising civil law. On the wall to the right of the Disputa we have beauty. This is Parnassus, with Apollo and the 9 muses surrounded by the great poets, including Homer, Virgil, and Dante. The next room is called File in the Borgo. Why don't you go on and I'll tell you a little bit about that. Okay, this is the last of the Raphael rooms, and it's called Fire in the Borgo. This was mostly done by Raphael's assistants. The one thing I'll point out here is that this fresco combines 2 stories. In 847, a fire broke out in the area near St. Peter's, then called the Borgo, and was quenched by Pope Leo IV with the sign of the cross. But inspired by antiquity, Raphael painted the column of the temple of Mars Ultor on the left. The old man supported by a youth recalls Virgil's story of Aeneas fleeing Troy, carrying his father Anchises, with his son Asinius at his side, and his wife Creusa following. And if the architecture looks more Renaissance than ancient Greek or medieval, well, it does. When you're ready, we will leave the Renaissance for a while and fast forward another few centuries. Follow the signs to the modern religious art collection. You'll probably have to bear to the right. Go ahead and pause, and when you arrive, I'll have a few last things to tell you. You should now be in the modern religious art collection, and you should be noticing that this art looks way different than anything you've seen so far. In this section of the museum, you will be doing your first art analysis. Now, don't be deceived. This section of the museum contains several rooms, so don't just stop in the first room. Stroll through until you see a work that strikes you. Try to find one that no one else is working on. Remember, these works are not only modern, they're also religious. Something about them speaks to the Christian faith, and in doing your analysis, allow the art to speak to you. Some of the art is representational. You will recognize familiar symbols like the cross, saints, and other Christian symbols. Others are more abstract, and these can be even more rewarding to contemplate, as you wonder just what it means. Notice colors, shadings, lines, textures. Pay attention to whatever catches your eye. When you have finished your analysis, go ahead and proceed to the grand finale, the Sistine Chapel. You should also switch podcasts to Rick Steves' excellent guided tour of the chapel. Have fun with the art.